Morning. Looks like our usual crowd here today. It's good to see everybody this morning. We're in Revelation. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. So I gave Richard. Richard was like, okay, what's next? And I was really kind and gave him that two witnesses thing. Hang on a second. Bill called me, which is cool. I mean, that's why I picked up. We just talking about he'd had knee replacement surgery. He's home. He says he's doing okay, and he's up on his feet a little bit and everything. That's why I took the call, is we just had this conversation about him. I'm like, it'd be no different than if you were here in the Sunday school classroom anyway, telling us how he's doing. So I figured I'd just pick it up. So, yeah. But he's home. I'll check on him some more this week, make sure he doesn't need anything. He said he doesn't need anything, but I'll check on him and make sure. But he said he's up and about and on his feet. I know the knee replacement, they try to get you up pretty quickly on that. So, yeah, usually day of or the day after for sure. So, yeah. So, yeah, he had it apparently Wednesday, like you said, and has been home. And so I'll check on him again this week. Some of you guys might want to check on him too if you think about it. Call him or text him. I don't know if he texts back, because I've got text messages that are from me to him. I noticed in my thing, but not a text message back the other direction. So he may be more a phone caller than a texter, which is fine. But yeah. All right. I have a guy that won't text me back, but he'll voice text me back. So he leaves me 3-minute voice text. I'm always confused by it, so I have to listen to the voice text. Not a voicemail. He doesn't call the number. He voice texts me. And so then I have to go listen to it. Yeah, it's funny. And he's a super nice guy. That's just kind of how he does stuff, because he wants to talk it out, not text it out. And he's like, I'm going to talk for 2 minutes. I don't want to text that out. And so he'll voice text it to me. He's the only person like that in my life, and it's fine. It's fine. I guess on his end, you don't have to pick up the phone call. You can go back and listen to it whenever you want. But I'll look down. It's like, I got a voice message. And so, yeah. Anyway. Well, I hope you guys are all having a good week. It's a busy time of year. We have the Resurrection Sunday next Sunday, and then we have a Good Friday service and a Saturday event out here on the lawn. School's really busy right now. This is when things get pretty intense in school environments for teachers and students alike. This kind of busy time of year, you start heading towards, she graduating, right? She graduates June, what? May 30. Oh, you don't even have to wait till June. That's even better. Okay, May 30. Okay, so that's busy. You guys got lots going on with that. Our son, Austin, graduates on May 12th, so from DBU. So we got, some kind of busy on that going on. So it's a busy time of year. If you're teaching, it's busy, because usually there's some testing. Are y'all done with testing? Is starting right now. Okay, it's usually about this time of year when standardized testing really kind of ramps up, and then you have the end of year is always busy, grading and getting grades finalized and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it's a busy season between church and school and graduation. Some of y'all may not have someone immediately graduating, but some of you may have people in your extended family. You're going to wind up at a graduation ceremony or something like that. In Austin's case, there's only 8 tickets. So we skinnied down the list, but we'll host some reception thing for him, so for everyone else. But he did not do a high school graduation at all. Like, he never graduated. I handed him his diploma because he had finished taking classes at MRA and he was doing dual credit at TCC. And we left him as a junior to see if he could get national merit semifinalist. And he missed it by a few points. So we went, just take the SAT and graduate. So he did. So, but he was at TCC the whole time. So he wasn't over here anyway. So when they had their big graduation at MRA, he's like, I don't want to walk. I haven't been at school for 2 years. I've been at TCC the whole time. We're like, okay. So I had Candace print off his diploma and I handed it to him. That was our graduation. It was like, hey, here's your diploma. He's like, okay, thanks. So this time it was like, all right, you should walk and we should do some kind of reception or something for you. So this year we're actually going to do something for him. But anyway, he's busy. He's busy though. Still, he's got 19 hours left, and because he finished off that spring break and the 9 hours that ended in February. So he got those 12 done, but he still has 19 hours. So he's busy. And yeah, we're down to the last 4.5, 5 weeks of classes and a couple of final exams. And so that's been busy. But anyway, well, I hope you guys are doing well. I hope things are progressing nicely for all of you. We've been working through this Revelation study, and I wanted to. So Richard, like last week, I was grilling chicken, the way Tom Sawyer painted fences is how I was grilling chicken. Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, I grill chicken the way Tom Sawyer paints fences, and I get people to pay me for the opportunity to do it. I'm kidding. But I did have a couple other people, Steve Hines and Doug King, grilled it up. I had sauced it the day before, and what I do when you got a big group like that is I do the rub-in spices, and then I put some olive oil on it. I mix it all up, and then I put it in big 1-gallon plastic baggies. And then it's 2 baggies per grill. You just open it and dump them on the grill, spread them out, and does pretty well with that because it's had all night long to percolate, Yep.
So it's pretty much olive oil and spice.
I do dry spices, rub it in.
Yeah, but then you said you cover it with olive oil.
I just put a little olive oil in there, and just you want the olive oil to keep it from burning the dry spices onto the chicken.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a buffer to keep it from. Otherwise, the dry spices will catch on fire.
You don't throw any tomatoey flavor in
No, I just use. I had this. There was red and yellow last week, and I panicked because I bought this new chicken rub spice, and I it caught me on fire. Well, then we grilled it up, and I ate some. Was like, it's not hot at all, and it was actually really good. And I regretted not making it all in that. So I don't know why it was so hot to the taste when I tasted it directly, but I was like, there's no way I can do this. There's kids coming to this thing. We're going to set them on fire. And then I tasted the actual chicken, because I hadn't tried this spicy before. I was like, that's not that hot. It was mild bit of spice, and even a kid would hardly even notice. So I kind of like that spice, so now I'm going to use it at home until I run out of it. But yeah, but I use the rub it in spice. You rub it into the boneless, skinless thighs. I bought every package of boneless, skinless thighs that Kroger had. So I come up to the front of the building, like the entire basket was $300 of boneless, skinless thighs, basically, is what I had. And I'm sure the person at the front was like, what in the world? And so, so the day before, I rubbed it in, and then, like I said, I put a little olive oil, rubbed that in, and then I put it in those baggies. Well, you let it sit overnight like that, the spices really kind of take hold. And so, yeah, that's how we got the chicken. But like I said, 2 other people grilled it. I just stood back there going, man, that looks good. You guys are doing really well. It's great. So Tom Sawyer painting fences and me grilling chicken. It's comparable, yeah. Except for they didn't pay me to do it. Tom Sawyer actually got people to pay him to paint his fence for him, which was really, really smart. But in my case, I just got volunteer labor out of it. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it turned out it seemed like that went pretty well. We had a big turnout. There was about 60 families-ish kind of on campus. And so, yeah, it's cool. It's cool. All right, anything else going on before we head into the text? No? All right. So I asked Richard to teach last week, and he covered the two witnesses and did a spectacular job. I went back and listened to it probably on Monday. I think I did on Monday because I was outlining what I wanted to do. But in the midst of this, I knew there was a piece of this I was kind of skipping that I wanted to cover, but it was still part of the first couple of verses. And so because of that, I'm going to come back and cover this one text. I'll tell you what we're covering and why I'm doing it, okay? So, and it's totally separate from the two witnesses. So we're good on the two witnesses. When we come back next week, we'll progress down beyond this. But I wanted to cover this one thing. I said, then there was given me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. Leave out the court, which is outside the temple, and do not measure it. So we need to talk about what that is. Why measuring the inside of the temple, but leaving out the court. And I'm going to give you Osborne's take on this. And I am not sure, but I'm going to give you his take. But there's some things I am sure about, is the reference to, for it has been given to the nations, they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. So I want to deal with this idea of the pagan nations treading Jerusalem underfoot for 42 months. I'm going to deal with that. And also deal with the original 70 AD siege and how people who are preterists handle this text versus premillennial and even postmillennial approaches to these things, okay? So then we have the two witnesses. I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. It seems like these are running parallel to each other. Like it's not that's not 42 months and then another 42 months. I think the two witnesses there's some kind of parallel here where they're going simultaneously, is what I'm suspecting. I don't think it's like there's 42 months and then another 42 months and then there's another 42 months, which shows up later. I don't think there's like a series of that, but we have things that are running concurrently. So these two witnesses are also going for the same period of time. They're clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And we talked last week, Richard talked last week about, are these actual witnesses symbolic individuals? If it's actual people, is it Elijah and Enoch? Is it Elijah and Moses who show up at Transfiguration? Do these two individuals represent Jews and the Jewish faithful and the church? I mean, there's a lot of speculation on some of these kinds of things. Who are these two witnesses? Are they the law and the prophets? You know, some people have tried to make it something like that. The Old Testament law and the prophets who are prophesying or testifying. And we have this two lampstand reference too, and there's lampstands already referenced in the Revelation chapter 1. And so all of those kinds of things. There's a lot of discussion about this. Richard did a great job kind of outlining all that stuff. And then it says this, and if anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouths and devours their enemies. So if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. Now, again, if it's the law and the prophets, how's that working? If it's Elijah and Moses, maybe. The fire's coming out of their mouth. If it's Elijah and Moses, it could be that they do represent the law and the prophets too. That's the other thing. Like if it's literally Elijah and Moses, but their real representation is the law and the prophets. In other words, some of these things could be more than one thing at once happening. In other words, what if it's Elijah and Moses representing the law and the prophets, which is why people are consumed by the things coming out of their mouths. The law and the prophets are indicting large swaths of population with the words of the law and the prophets. Things like that. I mean, there's all kinds of imagery that could be possible. Richard covered so much of that material last time. And so, yeah. It goes on to say, these have power to shut up the sky. So we have a famine of some sort, or a drought of some sort, so that rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying. And they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. That also kind of has a Moses and Elijah feel to it as well. Moses and plagues, Elijah and drought, right? Those two imagery also So it's like, that's why some people kind of point to those two. Some people think Elijah and Enoch, because they're two, you talked about that last week, who because they never died. It's like, well, they're available. I mean, they're available. They're available. They hey, what are you doing? Enoch's like, I'm nothing on the calendar today. Same for Elijah. And then they wind up dying at the end of this, and it's kind of like, well, they finally died, So some people have kind of made that emphasis of Enoch and Elijah, who neither one died. But then at the Transfiguration, you have a hard time explaining Moses and Elijah showing up then, because one of them never died and one of them did die. And so then it's kind of confusing. Well, they can show up at the Transfiguration, but they can't be in Revelation chapter 11 together. So then Elijah is kind of like, okay, look, I had to show up the Transfiguration and do this thing. Seems like I'm getting a lot of work here, God, post-retirement. So I don't know. Elijah's probably going to consult his union rep on this. It just seems like he's getting lots of overtime. Seems like this should be spread out. How about that Elisha guy? I did give him my mantle. So I don't know. It does seem like that. So you got all these speculations on these two witnesses, but they are totally unidentified in terms of them personally. So it's all speculative. Others have said it's just two random people, and they happen to be divinely granted the special powers. I don't know. I think Richard, you were leaning more towards symbolic type ideas. Yeah. No, that's. It's no. There's a lot of people who do that, and including I think Osborne's approach is also very similar to that. Of this is more symbolic, and the two witnesses now it may be symbolic of actual things like the Old and New Testament, or the law and the prophets, or something like that. But yeah, so and their dead bodies will lie in the street, and with which is mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, and where also their Lord was crucified. Those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days. They'll not permit their dead bodies to be buried. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, and they will send gifts to one another. Amazon gift cards over this. It's just weird. Like, hey, I sent you a $20 Amazon gift card. Those two people are dead. It just seems weird. I don't know. Yes?
I know, it says right there, because they were the two prophets of torment of those who dwell on the earth. So, and remarkably to me, of all the other prophets, these two can call as many places they want, as often as they want. It's like I can snap my fingers.
Right.
The closest I can recall, refresh my memory, is when Elijah shut off the rain, and that was about it.
Right.
Moses was like just announcing God's plagues.
Right.
These guys could turn on like a light switch. So I
Sure.
imagine they're so happy these guys can't get us anymore.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, the two people who've been causing us trouble. So I'm buying you an Amazon gift card, Paul, and sending it to you. You know what I'm saying? Nothing says dead two prophets in Jerusalem after 3.5 days of making life tough like an Amazon gift card. I'm just saying, it just makes sense.
The word for two prophets, does it imply two males?
A plural male could be male and female mixed group. If you have a mixed group, the way Greek works is a plural noun can be a mixed males and females. If you got a plural noun of only a feminine ending, it would be a plurality of people that were only women. If you get a plurality of male, it could be a mixed group. So it's a little bit hard to nail down. And in this case, the plurality is two. But yes, sir. That was another discussion as two angels, two angelic beings. The problem with that is the word angels is used elsewhere in the book of Revelation. So this would be weird unless John is unaware. And I think you pointed that out, is that if it's angels, why didn't John say they're angels? Because John's used angels in other places already. And he's already had conversations with angels, and this seems to be distinctive from the angelic beings that he's having encounters with. So that's the only problem with that, is that why would he say 2 prophets instead of 2 angels? Number one. Number two is, how are people going to kill him? I don't know the recipe for killing angels. There may be one, like, you go online and Google means by which you take an angel out, but this seems impossible to kill an angel. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you would kill an angel. I know they fight. They had that whole battle over Babylon between, those folks, and finally one of them gets to Daniel, and like, we've been fighting. But like at the end of the battle, are there dead angels places? I don't know. This just seems odd to me. I don't know. I don't know. That's in the realm where speculation is all we can do, and I prefer not do a ton of it. But yeah. Yeah, but if they were angels, seems like instead of prophets, the word angels would have been used. But angels came up as a potential in Osborne, and Richard, I think, alluded to it last week as well, as are they angelic beings or what? But yes. No, the word witness is the word we get the word martyr from. The word angel would have been evangelion, or from the word evangelion, good message, good messenger. Yes. Yes. Yeah, again, like I said, the only problem in this case is I think the word probably lends itself more to a people. Two people, or this is symbolic of 2 people, Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets, or something like that. Yeah, I would think the word angel would be used if John perceived them to be angels. Now, maybe John doesn't know, and he can't tell. But it does seem like he has some awareness of angelic beings. So I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah. After 3.5 days, the breath of God came back into them. They stood on their feet, and great fear fell on, I bet, most understated phrase in the Bible. And they're all coming by, celebrating. They probably left their bodies laying out in the street so they could come by and celebrate, and like giving out roses at the site. You got the trinket sellers, like, man, we can make some money. This is a tourist thing. And they're selling, hey, you can give each other roses and honor this. And then suddenly, you're over there selling stuff, and you hear a stir behind you, and everybody gasps, and you're like, that would be great fear. And again, it does seem weird if it's the law and the prophets that were dead for 3.5 days and then got back up, and great fear fell on people. I don't know. It's possible, but it does seem weird, unless the law and prophets are literally represented by Moses and Elijah. So, and they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. Then they went into heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. And in that hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to God of heaven. The second woe was past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly. All right, so now, I want to go back to just this text over. Leave the courtyard, which is outside the temple, and do not measure it. Osborne says this is a reference to this is what Osborne says, okay? So I'm going to tell you what he says, and then I'm just going to be like, What he says is this. This marks the protection of God for the spiritual aspect of the person inside the temple, but not the physical aspect of the person in the courtyard. So the church knew they were safe spiritually, but that physical trauma and trials would come. And he makes a defense for it, and Osborne's really smart, and he writes really well. And so I'm going to be careful here, because he's a well thought out theologian, and he has good reasons for writing what he wrote. But I read it and went, I'm not convinced that that's what's going on here. But anyway, on the 42 months of trampling, I just want to deal with this issue though. The nations trampling the holy city for 42 months. Okay, just that one phrase, because this is not the only place this occurs. And we didn't cover this 2 weeks ago, when I was in charge of the text and didn't do my job. So I'm going to try to do it today. All right. So Daniel chapter 8. It even exalted itself. This is this beast, creature, to be equal with the commander of the army, and to remove the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary is overthrown. And because of an offense, the army will be given to the horn, along with the regular sacrifice, and it will hurl truth to the ground and do as it pleases and be successful. Then I heard a holy one speaking to another holy one, said to that particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision of the regular sacrifice apply while the offense causes horror, so as to allow both the sanctuary and the army to be trampled? And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be restored, properly restored. 2,300. All right, so what do we do with that number? So how long is 2,300? All right, so if we do 30 times 42, we get 1,260. But this is evenings and mornings. So I think this could be 1,150 days, right? I couldn't tell if it's 2,300, if it's days or 2,300 evenings and mornings. That sounds like 1,150 days. No, which gets closer to the 1,260. The reason I'm asking is that 2,300 days doesn't necessarily connect with other stuff. So that's why I'm kind of like, what's going on here? But here's the things we have applied. We have the trampling of the sanctuary, which is what we're told in Revelation is going to take place by the Gentiles. It's from this creature that's clearly pagan and not Jewish. That Daniel 8 has this whole figure that's kind of dominating the world. And we're told that the regular sacrifices apply while the offense causes horror, so as to allow both the sanctuary and the army to be trampled. And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings. So I don't know, but we have trampling, we have a period of time, all these kinds of things. The period of time doesn't match because we have 42 months versus 2,300 days or 1,150 days. I'm not sure, but it's very similar language, okay? So just pointing out to you that this is not just in Revelation, but in the New Testament, Jesus said this. Now, Matthew 24, I taught on the Olivet Discourse on a Sunday night for about 12 weeks. Hard material. Yeah. So if you're interested in that material, you can go back and watch those. And that way, if you're struggling with sleep issues, anything like that, it's curative. It's curative. It is for me, at least. So it would probably be for you too. And also, if you ask me, what did you say in those? I'll say, that was 3 years ago. I had no idea. I don't remember. I know generally what I said, but I don't remember specifically. But this verse is one of the verses, because therefore when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. So Jesus quotes from Daniel in an end times reference here that's very similar to the Daniel 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 text, and abomination of desolation. So all of this kind of pulled together. Jesus refers to it. Now here's the thing. If you're a preterist, you love this material because you go, well, 70 AD, Titus the Roman attacks Jerusalem. Actually, 69 AD. Actually, I think you're supposed to say AD 69. The BC follows the number, the AD precedes it, I think. But anyway, you get the idea. Titus comes to Jerusalem, but before then, there's a group of zealots take over the city. And they have control of the city for about 2 and a half, 3 years, two and a half years before Titus shows up. So they have control of it for a couple years. Titus shows up, and he's going to reign in on them. And he reigns in on them by sieging the city and attacking it, but it takes him forever to destroy it. It is a massive battle, and the zealots, the Jewish zealots, are literally going toe-to-toe with the Roman army, and they're actually fairly successful. They were a few thousand soldiers short of maybe holding this thing off. I mean, like, they do an incredible job. Use a lot of guerrilla warfare. They would dress up like Romans and slide into the Roman camp and get information about what they were doing. And then they would create chaos inside the Roman camp, or they would suddenly attack them from inside the camp. By the time they're done, Titus and his army is so ticked off at these zealots that they are enraged. Like, they are just as angry as anyone's ever been at a military situation. So some people have tried to connect this abomination of desolation along with the 42 months and all that kind of stuff with that Titus destruction of 70 AD. People who are preterists hold the view that all of this took place in 70 AD. And so just want you to be aware of that. The problem is you have a hard time getting the 7 years on it. For the 7 years, for the remaining period of time, you have to go out to Masada, outside of Jerusalem, where 500 zealots hole up at Masada and are finally killed. But it doesn't really match the kind of global language that you see from Revelation is my problem, or even Matthew 24 and the Olivet Discourse. But I want you to be aware of that. There's some really strong preterist people like R.C. Sproul who teach this approach. Antiochus Epiphanes. He is 167 BC. Antiochus Epiphanes, the Seleucian king, comes to Jerusalem. He turns the Holy of Holies into a sacrifice to Saturn and offers a pig on it. Yeah, and then takes the raw pig meat and makes all the people of Jerusalem eat raw pig meat or get run through. Yeah, or some of them he ran through. They killed a lot of people that day. Antiochus brought in a Greco-Roman religious leader to figure out what they should do at the temple, and he's the one who says, let's sacrifice to Saturn. And why he picked Saturn, I don't know, but he picked Saturn. And I thought those cars were a little noisy. So I would have gone a different direction than Saturn. Those cars, the chain on those things, they were just noisy. I thought they were a little noisy, but I don't know. Yeah, anyway. We test drove one, yeah. They don't sell them anymore, right? Saturn's gone, right? I still remember because we test drove it, and the guy was trying to impress us, and he took us out he drove us out before we could drive it. He's going about 90 miles an hour on the side street. And Kim and I decided at that point, we are not buying this car from this person because he is dangerous. And I don't want to encourage him and his dangerous behavior. I wasn't impressed, and I didn't want to buy that car. He just blown the engine out by going 90 miles an hour on a 30-mile-an-hour road, by going 0 to 60 as fast as the car could. I was like, this is not going well. So I don't know why they picked Saturn. In light of that, why would they offer to Saturn at the temple? That didn't seem to work at all. Yeah, I think the pig meat stuff and the sexuality stuff probably are direct assaults on Judaism and Jewish tradition, which is why I picked it. And offering raw pig meat or eating raw pig meat or sacrificing pigs was a part of many pagan rituals, but it included Saturn. And so probably this is all driven around his anti-Jewish. I mean, they're very anti-Semitic people involved here. So, all right, so... But when Jesus then brings up abomination of desolation in Matthew 24, well, that's 200 years after Antiochus Epiphanes, so clearly he doesn't think that Antiochus Epiphanes fulfilled this completely, maybe partially, but not completely. And so he makes mention of it here. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, the Olivet is actually higher than Jerusalem. Mount of Olives actually looks down on the city. I don't know if he meant flee there and get out of the city or even further, but we do know historically that the church in Jerusalem, when Titus showed up, left Jerusalem because of the words of Jesus. And so even though Jerusalem was destroyed, the church was preserved. And later became predominantly a Gentile-based church, though, ironically. But that the church of Jerusalem was actually preserved in that moment because of that. According to, there's scant records on this, but there's some records that imply that the group got out of Jerusalem when Titus surrounded it, and it saved the church. So, all right. Now, there's another text in Zechariah. Now, Zechariah, here's the thing about the book of Zechariah. It is the most apocalyptic book in the Old Testament, meaning it's the most like reading the book of Revelation in the Old Testament. Most symbols, most end-time stuff. It's hard reading. It may be one of the hardest books in the Bible. And I remember one time, Cindy's Wednesday night group was going through Old Testament prophets, which, boy, that's some brave stuff. And then I asked her at one point, I said, what are y'all going through? She goes, Zechariah. I went, have you lost your mind? That sounds really hard. She goes, I thought we were supposed to teach the whole counsel of the Word of God or something like that. I went, yeah, but not Zechariah. No, I'm just kidding. So I told her, that's a really challenging book. She goes, it's been really challenging, but it's because it's so symbolic. But Zechariah 12, it says, it will come about on that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the people. All who lift it will injure themselves severely, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. And then Luke 21 says this. So some people have been like, oh, that's Titus surrounding Jerusalem. Luke 21 says this, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So you have this reference. The time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So a lot of people have connected Luke 21 to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. I think rightly so. Jerusalem, all of them got sold into slavery, taken down to boats and sold into slavery. A lot of them into slavery, ironically, to Egypt, of all places, and also to Greece and stuff like that. But they take them down. There's the Mediterranean Sea. They take them down there and they sell them to slave traders at the Mediterranean Sea. They get exported all over the world. And the Gentiles kind of take over the city of Jerusalem at this point, and they kind of dominate, and it becomes a Gentile thing mostly, all the way through the Crusades. You have through that, and then post-Crusades and those kinds of things. You do have during the First and Second Crusade, the Europeans actually rule the city of Jerusalem. One of them declares himself to be king of Jerusalem, which made the Pope really mad at him. But they take over. For about 100 years, Jerusalem fell in the hands of kind of Europeans, and then Muslims take back over the city. And then it wound up in Muslim hands until Israel took over Jerusalem in 1967. In 1967, Israel takes over Jerusalem. It's crazy. And a lot of people were looking at it going, until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled, and people looked at it and went, I think that's it. Well, there were a lot of people at that point who said, this is it. The time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. The trampling by the nations, by the Gentiles, has now come about. So Jesus says, until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And the one other thing about this that reminds me, so those who are hyper-preterists have a hard time, I think, with Romans chapter 11. In Romans 11, we get the following text. This time of the Gentiles, the time of the Gentiles to be fulfilled may also be reference to the kingdom primarily being a Gentile-related focus. So Romans 11 says this, I say then about the Jews, they did not stumble so as to fall, did they? Far from it. But by their wrongdoing, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make them jealous. Now, if their wrongdoing proves to be riches for the world and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fulfillment be? But I'm speaking to you who are Gentiles. Now, in the hyper-preterist world, they say that the time of the Gentiles was from Pentecost, or from when Samaria first comes into the gospel till 70 AD. That's the time of the Gentiles. And the problem with this is that would mean a massive revival of Jews right before this takes place. And that's what they argue. Preterists will argue, yeah, it happened, because he says this, therefore, insofar as I'm an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry if somehow I may move my own people to jealousy and save some of them. For if their rejection proves to be reconciliation of the world, how much will their acceptance be but life from the dead? So there's this future revival of Jews that Paul's talking about. That in the meantime, Gentiles have been grafted into the plan of God, and we're in this Gentile age. Preterists argue, yeah, that time period was from about 40 AD to about 67 AD or something like that. And then the Gentile age now shifted back to the Jews. But there's zero historical evidence of this, that the Jews en masse in Jerusalem converted to Christianity before they were sold off into slavery or killed. There's no evidence of this. There's no historical evidence of this. And also, does the church today look like it's Jew or Gentile dominated? It's Gentile dominated, right? So it's not like the time of the Gentiles is up. Now, what preterists have to argue is that we were only given information through 70 AD. After that, who knows what's going to happen? And to me, the problem with this is that they're claiming then that there's historical evidence that God grafted Jews back into the kingdom. He just didn't tell us about it. And I'll give you an example of why I think this is problematic. Ignatius of Antioch, he's an old dude in 117 AD when he winds up martyred. I think he was fed to the lions. That sounds like a bad way to go out, right? Like, I don't know. I think I'd pick some other way. But he got fed to lions. But he was the pastor of Antioch. You know the church at Antioch? It's the one that sent Paul and Silas out, and Paul and Barnabas out, and John Mark. And he was pastor for a long, long time. He knew John personally. He knew John the Apostle personally, which is pretty cool. But he used to be a persecutor of the church, like Paul, and became a believer. But he makes reference to future events and timing and things like that, as if 70 AD was not the end time fulfillment. But he was in Antioch in 70 AD when all these things took place. To me, it feels like if he thought 70 AD was the fulfillment of those things, he wouldn't have written the 7 letters the way he did. That seems to me like he thinks there's still yet future things to happen with reference to these things. So that's one example I have. And he knew John personally, and those kind of things. A lot of hyper-preterists will say John wrote all his stuff before 70 AD, and after 70 AD, there was no more revelation from God at all in New Testament writings. And that 70 AD ended that era of apostolic authority, and then after 70 AD, no one else said anything. No one else wrote anything, that kind of thing. But again, I get back to Ignatius of Antioch, who seems to think there's still yet future events that are related to these prophecies. And that would be weird, given that he was alive in 70 AD in Antioch, which is just a few hundred miles from Jerusalem, and fully aware of these things, and yet doesn't think 70 AD was a fulfillment. So if there was evidence of mass Jewish revival and fulfillment of these promises, you would think Ignatius of Antioch would have said, we're so thankful these prophecies have been fulfilled, but he doesn't. He acts like they're still yet future. Now, it could be he's made a mistake. I'm not claiming he's apostolic. I'm just suggesting if God says there's these big prophecies that are going to take place, and the pastor 300 miles away, who's like a really faithful servant, doesn't recognize it, that seems weird to me. It just seems like it'd be more obvious. I'm not saying it didn't happen, just saying it seems weird to me. Okay? Does that make sense? Like, just kind of arguing. I know I'm arguing from silence here, and that's always dangerous, but it just seems weird that if all of the reconciliation to God has taken, they haven't stumbled those so completely fallen, they will be made jealous and they will be grafted back in and they will be reconciled. There's no evidence that that's happened in church history with the Jewish people in mass at this level. So, all right, so what is this trampling of the holy city? I don't know. Oh, by the way, Mark chapter 10. Jesus said to them, truly, I say to you, there is no one who has left house or brother or sister or mother or father, but receive 100 times as much in the present age, along with the age to come. just a note, Osborne uses this verse to prove that persecution is going to take place physically while being preserved spiritually. Therefore, this temple picture of the outer courtyard, don't measure it, it's being trampled by the pagans, is different than the sanctuary part of it itself, and that this is a reference to the spiritual preservation of believers versus the physical preservation of believers. And he uses Mark 10 as the example for this. The only problem I have with this is that Mark 10 doesn't seem to be addressing this end time stuff at all. And so it seemed a little bit lifted. But okay, I'm going to give you Osborne's observations and then I'll liberate you from this. All right. The message of the place of the church in the end time events continues. John is asked to replicate Ezekiel's measuring of the temple with much the same message. God's people belong to him and are under his protection. Okay, this is Osborne, this is not the Bible. So if you go looking for it in your Bible, you won't see this verse because it's not in the Bible. All right. However, Revelation 11:2 departs from the scene in Ezekiel and prophesies the situation of the final period in history. The outer court is unprotected, for God will allow the pagans to trample the saints for a period of the great tribulation. In other words, God will protect them spiritually, but allow the forces of evil to persecute and kill them, similar to Jesus' promise in Mark 10:30, that God would repay every sacrifice 100 times, but would allow persecution. Okay. I'm just going to say, I don't know how Mark 10 got brought into this by Osborne. To me, it seemed like a leap. But from Osborne's perspective, this temple and the 42 months and the trampling is all symbolic of the spiritual preservation of the church, but the physical persecution and death that will still occur. I'm going to go more literal with it. I think it's a real building. I think the trampling under feet is the massive influence of pagans all around them, while Jews try to preserve a renewed Jewish worship. And this is a fulfillment of what Jesus said about the final days, and also what Revelation says about the final days. But that's my historical premillennialism speaking, and not the post-mill view of Richard or the preterist view of others. But that's kind of where I see this kind of going. I think this is 42 real months. I think it's a real period of time. I think it occurs simultaneously with the witnesses that are in Jerusalem witnessing about all these things. I think the Jewish people are able to keep the sanctuary part of the thing preserved from Gentile visitors. But pretty quickly, there's a mass encroachment by Gentiles on this area. I don't know. It looks like it's something real to me. But I'm a historical premillennialist. So I'm just telling you that that's kind of how I view these texts. They're hard. And they should be, because they haven't happened yet. So when they happen, we'll know. See, that's why I'm a little bit skeptical of the 70 AD. Because it was that clear, I think people look back and go, oh, yeah, that was it. But no early church fathers did that. Not one early church father says, yeah, 70 AD is definitely it. Eusebius doesn't say it. Tertullian doesn't say it. Ignatius of Antioch doesn't say it. Polycarp doesn't say it. Justin Martyr doesn't say it. I mean, and Justin Martyr is like huge into quoting Jewish material. His argument with Trypho the Jew is one of the best apologetic things you could ever read. But he doesn't spend a lot of time talking about any of these things of 70 AD. It doesn't even come up. Other than telling them the temple sacrifice had been destroyed when the temple got destroyed, therefore we know that that's been set aside by God. That's his main argument with Trypho the Jew. Yes?
At the end of the day, behind all this, the preterism were, according to them, living in Christ's reign on this earth right now.
No, that's that's a little bit more post-mill. Preterists would just say, we now live on, the church goes on, the world will go on indefinitely, and when you die, there's a spiritual, and a hyper-preterist would say there's a spirituality. Sproul was a preterist, but also held there are some events of Revelation still to be fulfilled, like a new heaven and new earth. Sproul didn't, the hyper-preterist would say, everything's already happened in 70 AD. All that's left now is a spiritual heaven for those who die as believers, and the world will go on indefinitely. But Sproul actually held that there is a final conclusion, but that everything's already happened other than the new heaven and new earth, basically. Final judgment, new heaven, new earth is all I think that Sproul felt was left. And he's on the better end of the preterist. I think he does a really good job making an argument for it. The last days according to Jesus is, that's MacArthur. Wait, Sproul's is, maybe that is his. The last days according to Jesus is Sproul. And he makes a good argument in there about preterism. I don't agree with him, but he makes a good argument. And if I read a good argument from someone I don't agree with, I'm going to go, that's pretty good. And so Sproul would be the person I'd point you to read about good preterist argument. He does a pretty good job with it. I don't think he's right, but I'm going to nod in agreement on some pretty good arguments. He does a really good job presenting it. So if you're preterist, just know you have some really good people in your corner. And if you're post-mill, there's some really good people in your corner too, Jonathan Edwards being one of them. And if you're a historical premillennialist, you're following after knuckleheads like me, and you're probably in a lot of trouble. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Well, let's pray together. We're out of time. Lord God, you are gracious and kind. Thank you for just the joy of being able to talk through your word and study your word and think about these things. Lord, we want to be ever ready and vigilant to honor you and glorify you no matter the circumstance, no matter what end time prophecy things we think we've figured out, that ultimately we need to walk with you and honor you and humble ourselves before you and love our neighbors and love the gospel. I pray you would give us pure hearts and minds and a love for your people and a love for all people. We pray these things in your name. Amen. All right, you guys have a good week.